Welcome to the Weekend Wellness Hour. Today we have a returning guest, my new friend, Linda Downey, who I've had on here a couple times already because she's a wealth of information. So she's a diagnostic or functional diagnostic nutritional practitioner, which covers a lot of areas of health and wellness. And so we talked a little bit about the general ideas of functional nutrition before, and then we looked at stool testing, and now we're going to cover food sensitivities today, because this is a big topic with people where you start to eat something, you may feel ill, you're not really sure what's going on, but you don't have an allergic reaction. So we're going to dive into that today with Linda, and I want to welcome you back, Linda. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Dr. Amy. I'm so happy to be here. It's fun always chatting with you.
Wonderful. So we really appreciate it. And can you dive into today, what are food sensitivities? What does it mean to have a food sensitivity?
Sure. Before we dive into that specifically, I want to take a little bit of a step back and just talk about inflammation in the body. So I think most people recognize, wherever your window that you look through, conventional medicine, functional medicine, diseases, chronic illness comes from a source is always inflammation, right? So there's something that's causing inflammation in the body. And inflammation is a normal immune response when the immune system is triggered against anything. That's what the immune system is supposed to do, is an inflammatory response happens where certain compounds are sent to attack and handle what this issue is. What happens is when there's chronic inflammation and systemic, meaning throughout the body, now we get into a problem, because we're not supposed to stay in that state, right? We're supposed to handle it and then return back to a non-inflamed state. So food is something that we eat every day, right? We put food in our body every day, multiple times throughout the day. And so food has become, for many people, a problem and a big contributor to this state of inflammation in the body. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Totally agree with that.
Yeah. And so why this happens, and we are going to talk about the difference between an allergy and a sensitivity for sure, but this happens typically when the gut, which we've already talked about in another session, but when the gut is not as healthy as we'd like it to be and not doing a great job and being a barrier between what comes in and the bloodstream, then when we eat foods, they can leak into the bloodstream and cause that inflammatory response, even if it's blueberries, something that's good and healthy. So there's certain foods that we recognize are inflammatory and a problem for pretty much most people across the board. And then there's other foods, and we'll do a food sensitivity test to determine what are those foods that are specific to each person. And what happens is, the longer you go on without addressing this whole issue, the more sensitive you become, and more foods will pile onto the list. So 6 months ago, you noticed these 3 things, and now as time goes on, these other 3 things that you used to be able to eat are now a problem, right? So that's why that adds up. Yeah.
So basically, your level of inflammation in your body will, as it changes, your food sensitivities change too, or can become additive if your inflammation becomes worse. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, the increased food sensitivities make the inflammation worse. It's not that the inflammation necessarily, although inflammation in the gut is contributing to why more and more foods are a problem.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And foods are one thing that cause inflammation. It's certainly not the only thing. So when I go to work with a client who's having a lot of chronic issues, it's the first place that we go to work, the gut and food, because as I said, you're taking food in every day, right? And we want to get a handle on that, but it's not the only thing that might be causing systemic inflammation. So that's a whole nother topic. Maybe we'll come back another day and talk about those things.
Yeah.
For food. So, yeah, so that's really why food sensitivities are important. Now, there's a lot of different tests out there, and most of them are whole foods tests, which I used to do with people. However, when I did my own whole foods test, it came back that wheat was fine. And I have thyroid autoimmune disease, and I knew that wheat was not fine. So I was like, why is this test saying that wheat is fine?
Yeah.
And so I did a little bit of investigating, and here's the difference. So now I do a food Zoomers test, which does not look at the whole food. It looks at the protein levels, which is how your body sees the food, right? It comes in and it gets broken down into peptide chains. That's how your body and your bloodstream and your immune system see it, not like a tomato. So the difference between whole food and a food Zoomers test is a whole food sees the food is like a picture of a whole tomato. There's that whole tomato. It's fine. A Zoomer's test sees it as like a jigsaw puzzle, and it's looking at each jigsaw puzzle of the tomato. So maybe the puzzle pieces that make up the stem are fine for you, but maybe the puzzle pieces that make up the seeds are not. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
So now I really use the food Zoomers because I feel like that technology and that depth of looking at it is much more informative. Because here's what happens. People, it's hard to make behavioral changes. And so even as a practitioner, I got back my whole foods test. I was like, says wheat isn't that bad. Maybe it's really not as bad as I thought it was. Now my son says, Mom, can we order a grandma's pie for, pizza? And I'm like, maybe I can have a piece because my whole foods test says it's not so bad. You know what I mean? Like now I'm using it to justify the piece of pizza that I want instead of really knowing, no, wheat is not okay for me, and I'm gonna have symptoms from eating that. So
yeah. So then are there different levels of sensitivity too? Because we know an allergy is different. I mean, that's a reaction. So what about with food sensitivities?
Yeah, and I have a sample test for you, so I'll show you how they distinguish that on the test. So there's a few. So immunoglobulins are compounds that your immune system makes in response to an allergen, and so that's called IgGs. And there's several different kinds of IgGs. A true allergy, like somebody who's eating peanuts and now, needs an EpiPen because their throat swells and they can't breathe. That's a true allergy. That's like an immediate, pretty quick anyway, response. That's life-threatening. That's an IgE, like an elephant, right? An IgE is looking at those true allergies. The sensitivity test is looking at two other kinds of immunoglobulins, an IgA and an IgG. IgA is an immunoglobulin, an immune response. Here's how I remember it. A stands for acute. So an acute response, the letter A. So an IgA is going to happen pretty quickly. Like you go out to dinner and by the time you're home at 8 o'clock, you're like, oof, my stomach doesn't feel good. Or maybe even before you leave the restaurant, you're like bloated or something, right? So that's an acute, and it's pretty much localized maybe to the digestive system. And those antibodies will be gone in a few days. So if you're going to take blood work and IgAs are showing up, that means you probably were exposed pretty recently to that food. IgG is the other type that is going to show up on this test, and that is a little bit different. Number one, your body's response to IgG antibodies will be 2 or 3 days later. So today's Saturday, you could go out to dinner tonight and Tuesday have a headache, or have your knees hurt, or you have stiffness in your back, or you break out. 2 or 3 days later, so you're probably not thinking this was Saturday's dinner. Right?
Definitely.
Yeah. You might be thinking, I didn't sleep well last night and now my back hurts, or why do I have a headache? But it's 2 days ago. So that's number one, how it's different. Number two is it shows up systemically. So it will show up joints, headache, skin, right? It'll show up in various places throughout the body, not just like your GI system. And number three, IgGs take a long time for your body to get rid of. So for example, wheat is a common one, right? Gluten. Gluten IgG antibodies can take anywhere from 6 to 8 months to go down, which means when they're elevated, the immune system is firing up. That inflammation is there because the immune system is triggered and on attack. And that can take 6 to 8 months. So I'll get on the phone with people and they'll say, yeah, I gave up gluten. It's been like 6 weeks, but I don't feel any different. It may take 6 months, and it's only one exposure, and it depends on how sensitive you are, right? Everybody's different, but it potentially could be your kid has pretzel nuggets and you have one little pretzel nugget and, they're elevated. Or it may take 3 exposures before your body responds. Everybody's different. But does that make sense on the different levels of sensitivity?
Absolutely, yeah. And I can see how it's hard to find out our sensitivities, especially if it's delayed a couple days and you don't even realize that. And then sometimes we don't even remember what we ate 2 days ago or all the components of that meal. I can see why testing is actually a good thing to help us really figure out what our body's sensitive to.
Yeah. And when I start working with someone, we automatically start with an elimination diet, an autoimmune elimination diet, which most people, and you can find that on the internet because it just eliminates the typical foods that everybody has a problem with. So that means gluten, dairy, corn, soy, nuts, alcohol, caffeine, right? Those are the typical ones. And then if having the benefit of the test means now I can go, oh, eggs is in there. I could go, Amy, your test came back. Guess what? Eggs are not a problem for you. You can go ahead and add those back in, or corn or whatever. If you don't have the benefit of the test, you could spend 3 or 4 months in that elimination diet. And here's a couple things. You've only eliminated those 5 or 6 things, but I've had clients' tests come back salmon, blueberries, strawberries, celery, olives, because their health of their gut was bad. And so those foods that are healthy are leaking into their bloodstream and flagging their immune system.
Got it.
That's why those foods are becoming a problem. But if you eliminated everything that you think is a problem or whatever, you need to stay off of them for at least 3 months. And then you add things back in one at a time. So you might say, okay, I'm going to add eggs back in, and I'm going to do that for 2 or 3 days pretty significantly. You don't just have like an egg. You have like eggs in the morning, eggs again at night, next day eggs, because you want to hit that immune system and see, does it flare up or does it stay okay? So that's one thing that you can do. But I think that having the test, which gives me really specific information for you, and then you don't have to do that for 3 months on foods that maybe aren't even a problem,
Yeah. Now, if your gut heals, is it possible that blueberries that you were sensitive to before no longer are a problem? So
exactly,
taking the time to allow yourself to heal then.
Exactly. That's what we do, is we go to work on healing the gut, the lining of the gut where damage has occurred, creating a better environment in the microbiome, meaning what germs are living there, what bacteria, and then we can start to add foods back in. Now, I will tell you, for most people, gluten is never going to be added back in because gluten in this country is a problem, and it's doused in glyphosate and it's damaging. So it's just going to come in and cause damage. Typically, dairy is not added back in either. But for a lot of those other foods that you're like totally bummed about, you can add them back in when you do the work to get them healed, to get yourself healed.
Right. And that's so good to hear, because most people are thinking, okay, blueberries, why in the world would that be bad? Or, almonds or whatever. I know I've heard a lot of almond allergies out there.
Yep.
So
I was sensitive to almonds. I'm not allergic, but I was sensitive. I had to eliminate them out. When I did my first test, broccoli was on my list. I was eating broccoli 4 times a week, but that's probably why I was sensitive to it, because I was eating it so often. So another component that we do is do a rotation diet. So while you're healing, you're rotating your foods so that you're not creating more sensitivities.
Gotcha.
And the other thing is that you want to add foods back in. I do know practitioners and people who, like, you stay on an elimination diet, you have autoimmune issues, like the rest of your life you're on this elimination diet. To me, number one, there's a lot of foods that are really healthy that you
Yeah.
don't want to be cutting out. And number two, this is not fun to be so restricted, right? The goal is let's see what we can add back in. To me,
Yeah.
that's the goal.
Yeah, because there are times you're going to go out to eat somewhere and you don't want to have to sit there and pick out every little piece that you've tested previously that you were sensitive. So it's nice to be able to integrate back in and allow your gut microbiome to adjust to the food that you're eating now and you're allowing back in.
Exactly. That's the
Yeah.
approach that I like to take. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would love to show you, if I can share
Sure.
my screen, I would love to
Yep.
show you the company that we do the food sensitivities test. They actually have a nice
Sure.
list of what symptoms you might be experiencing and what foods are typically related to that. So I'd love to
That's
share
great.
that with you.
Absolutely.
And then if we have time, I think we will, an
Yeah.
actual sample report. So you can, and we'll walk
Sure.
through it a little bit. Is that good?
Okay. Sounds great.
Okay. I love this stuff. So if I tend to talk too long, you got to tell me. Okay.
Not at all.
Do you see
Yes,
this?
we can.
Okay. So
Yep.
the Zoomers is different than a whole foods test. Okay. This is what it's called. And it's looking at
Okay.
the peptides. All right. So this is from practitioner, information that they said how to help your clients decide which Zoomers are important. So they have a lot of different Zoomers available. You can do corn. Lectins are a particular protein in certain vegetables. Dairy, you can do different milks other than dairy, like goat's milk, sheep's milk, eggs, peanuts, nuts, soy, seafood, etc. And then the way that you decide, and when I do these with people, we typically choose 4, just because the way that the company offers it and for cost, that makes the most sense to do 4. But you could
Okay.
look at, so people who are very sensitive, not just to foods, but to chemicals, they get a lot of skin rashes, temperature dysregulation, they have respiratory issues, etc. And especially if they notice that there's a correlation to certain foods. Anybody who's been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, there's a strong relationship to gut health, food, and autoimmunity. All right. If a person just has chronic health issues that they can't seem to get over, or an inability to lose weight, okay. If a person has specific GI symptoms, and then there's a neurological component as well. And so as I scroll down, just because we don't need all of the text, but yeah. So here they show you wheat is related to these issues in the body. So if a person is saying they're experiencing these, we definitely want to do a wheat Zoomer and just really see how sensitive they are. What I want to point out here is like vitamin D deficiency. Well, just about everybody has that. And there's a reason why. There's a component in wheat, in the lectin part of wheat, that actually attaches to the receptor sites for vitamin D in the gut.
Okay. That's interesting. Wow. And brain fog too. I know that's a big issue for a lot of people, is the brain fog.
Yep. Okay, so corn, if you have gluten sensitivity and you've switched now to a lot of gluten-free foods, well, they're made up of corn.
Got it.
So now you can develop that. Mold and mycotoxin exposure. So people who have had that, mold in their houses, and it's just a relationship. Oftentimes the proteins of these foods look a lot like the proteins of other things. For example, in wheat, gluten, the actual peptide chain of gluten resembles the thyroid gland proteins. So when the immune system has tagged gluten as a problem, every time you eat gluten, the immune system goes, oh, there's that thing again. It's a problem. Let me go after it. And it attacks the thyroid. That's thyroid autoimmunity. So the same thing, like mold and other mycotoxins maybe look a lot like corn. And that's why if you've had a problem with one, now you have a problem with corn.
Okay.
Other grains, so not just wheat, but a lot of other grains can give you, all of these issues. And you can see there's an overlap. Here we have brain fog again, autoimmune disease, type 1 diabetes, neurological issues, nutrient malabsorption. I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I think, is our crops are so heavily sprayed with glyphosate, which is Roundup. And that
Yeah.
pesticide is attached to so many crops and grains in our country. I think that's probably a big part of the problem, even maybe more than the food itself.
Okay.
Okay. So then, so I'm just showing you that they can relate these different issues. So when somebody says they have an autoimmune disease, which I have had 4, we do, when we bundle a Zoomer's test together, we definitely want to do lectin, grain, wheat, corn and dairy, unless somebody's like, I never drink dairy, I don't take in any dairy. Well, then
Right.
we won't bother to do the dairy. If somebody says I don't eat seafood, well, then we don't really bother to do a seafood one. But if somebody else, I've had a client who says, we do a lot of cruises, 2 or 3 cruises a year, and there's always a lot of seafood. I want to know if seafood, so it's a whole panel of seafood. Okay.
Got it. Yeah.
And nuts. So this is like a conversation with someone. You can't order a food Zoomer on your own. You need to go through a practitioner.
Got it.
When I work with a client, we have a conversation and we pick based on their life and what they like, which ones we're going to do. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like, let's say the seafood Zoomer, when you get that result back, it looks at different types of seafood as well as the peptides and the protein, or is it just cover the common proteins that are in various types of seafood?
It's going to look at shrimp, proteins,
Okay.
and lobster, all the proteins
Okay.
of that.
Oh, that's good. So it does break it down per that type of animal. Good.
Yes. Yep. And I'm going to show you, let me just click out of here. Here is, did I jump to this too quickly? I was going to go through a sample
Nope.
report. Are there any questions before
Totally fine.
Okay.
We are good.
Okay, so here's a sample report. And the first thing that you see is for this report, here's the food on the left. And you're going to see obviously colored barcodes on the right that relate to whatever foods we tested. If we didn't test the food, like here's camel milk. We didn't do that mammalian, this is not on here. So camel milk, there's nothing there, right? But what we did do was nuts and corn and, other things as we go through. So you'll see here, almonds, green is fine. Red is not good. Almonds here, somewhere, a moderate response. Not terrible, but definitely still a sensitivity, right?
Okay, yep.
So as we go down, you can see, but what I want to point out here, this is intestinal permeability. So in the wheat Zoomer, there is a part of that that looks at intestinal permeability, which is leaky gut. Do you know what leaky gut is?
Yep, I have heard a lot about that. I know quite a few people actually who have leaky gut.
Yeah, it's pretty common. And here's what it is. So if you looked at, from your mouth all the way down to the other end, the opposite hole, right? It's one long tube,
Right.
right? That's what it is. And so in the colon, it's a long tube. Think of it like a hose. And you've got the inner part, which is where stuff is going through, and there's bacteria that live there. Then you have the mucosal lining. Every part of our body that's in contact with the external environment is lined with mucus, right? So our respiratory tract, nasal passages, GI tract, and anything that's now connected to the outside world, there's mucus there. And that's the job of the mucus, is to catch bacteria or things that shouldn't be going in. So, you swim in a lake, things can enter from both ends, right? You swallow water, or water can go in the other end. So that mucus is supposed to catch it. And then below the mucus lining is the actual layer of cells. When that mucus lining has been damaged and that layer of cells now has a gap in it, that's leaky gut. Or intestinal permeability. It's allowing things to permeate through the intestinal wall. That's not supposed to happen. And there's multiple reasons why that does happen, which, it's another conversation. But they show here a level of intestinal permeability. So you don't want any gaps in the intestinal wall. We have to work on fixing that. Okay. So then the next part of the lab report will give a summary. And so you can see, we did not do a panel, but if we did a full panel, that would be all of these foods. We did very specific food zoomers. So we did the
Okay.
lectins and aquaporins, and it shows corn is a problem here. Lectins and aquaporins are two different parts of that vegetable. So, you know, tomatoes have aquaporins. Tomatoes also have lectins down here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So I might be okay for aquaporins, but not okay for lectins. Let me move this over
Got
so
it.
you can see that better. Is that better? Well, that's,
Yep, we can see that.
yeah. So that's, I just want to point it out because you could see, oh, you know, tomatoes are okay. Well, here tomatoes are okay in both instances, aquaporins and lectins. But let's just say it was okay for one and not okay for the other. That can be confusing. So are tomatoes okay or not? Well, tomatoes are not, because you can't really separate out those proteins when you're cooking them, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's telling you which part of that food is the problem.
Now, does cooking a food change the way that you're sensitive to it? Like, 'cause I know they say for lectins, like to you know, pressure cook your beans or whatever to reduce the lectin.
Yeah, for lectins, that does make a difference. For the rest of the other peptides, really not. But if you have a lectin issue and you make sure you cook your food well, because the heat breaks down the bonds between those peptides, and so they're no longer in that same form. So this is a wheat. The wheat is here very high, right at the very end. So wheat is a big problem. I'm just going to be honest with you. This is my report.
Yeah.
So this is my personal report. And I wish I had thought of it. I would have grabbed my Whole Foods one so you could see wheat was totally fine. And it's clearly off the tracks.
Yeah.
Corn, also a problem for me, which was a bummer because my go-to snack used to be organic popcorn that I would cook myself. I would buy a good non-GMO organic popcorn and cook it on the stove. Or I would make homemade guacamole and organic blue corn tortilla chips. Those were my two things.
Oh, yeah.
But no more, because corn for me is a problem. Now, luckily, dairy is not a problem for me.
Wow.
So, but dairy is one. In an elimination diet, we remove all dairy. Dairy isn't great. Like I don't try to do a lot of dairy, but at least I know it's not going to be a problem for me.
Yeah.
Okay. So then it just goes through. We don't need to look at every single one. Here was my intestinal permeability score, right? So I had leaky gut. All right, let's get down into, all right, so now it gets into the actual wheat. Can I move this panel thing? No, I was just trying to make it be more clear, sorry. The actual wheat panels. And here's what you want to see. So here's my score again. Positive, moderate, negative. Positive is not a good thing. It means there was a response, right? So I had a positive. Now here we go. IgG versus IgA. IgA would mean I had had wheat pretty close within a couple of days of taking my blood test.
Okay.
I hadn't. I pretty much kept it out of my diet. However, my IgG responses were high. There's plenty there. In this would be the red zone. This would be the yellow. And this means no issue. So several of the wheat proteins for me are a problem, and a significant problem. Okay. Now this is the IgE. That's the true allergy. That would be a celiac. I don't have celiac. I don't have an allergy. In fact, my number's quite low, but I certainly do. Yeah, but I do have quite a bit of sensitivity. So, all right, as we go through, this looks at the enzymes for celiac disease, not a problem. These peptides can show up to 4 years in advance if you're developing celiac. Celiac is the #1 increasing autoimmune condition in this country right now, celiac disease. Wow. Hashimoto's is quite prevalent, but in terms of growing numbers. Intestinal permeability, I've been working on it. This is from a while ago, this test. I had scored much higher, and I've been working on healing my gut. So now I don't have a ton of response here, but I'm going to tell you what these things mean. Is this okay? Am I talking to you?
Yeah, nope, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so zonulin is the gatekeeper of the lining of the gut. And the zonulin is meant to, when something gets into that hose, zonulin is meant to open up and let it go into the bloodstream so that the immune system can see it, surround it, and get rid of it. That's what zonulin is supposed to do. That's how your immune system is supposed to work. So zonulin is called the gatekeeper of the gut. However, when we have chronic things going in, stress opens that up. Antibiotics, processed foods, caffeine, sugar, they all are recognized as a problem, and they will open up zonulin, and now the gates are just left open all the time, right? That's the body going, well, 10 minutes ago it was the antibiotic, but now it's the processed food, and now it's the stress, you know what I mean? So the zonulin is just staying chronically open. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to open, but then close again and have nice tight junctions. So that is where I was still having an issue. Actin, so what it means is anti-zonulin immunoglobulins, mine were elevated. Anti-zonulin, my body says, oh, so much zonulin is being produced, I need anti-zonulin to try to combat that issue. Actin is actually microscopic tears in the lining of the gut. So you've got opening of junctions and you've got tearing.
Got it.
Thankfully, I don't have that right now. I did used to, but I've healed that.
Okay.
And then LPS is lipopolysaccharides. Lipopolysaccharides, to be honest, is poop from bad bacteria.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah, this is a blood test, right? You prick your finger. So this is going to see, do you have poop from bad bacteria in your gut that's floating around your bloodstream? And a lot of people do. I've seen numbers in the 400s, and that's brain fog. That toxic compound is floating around the bloodstream and getting into organs and tissues, and that's contributing to symptoms, right? So that's what the LPS is. So those are the three things that this test knows are related to leaks and gaps in the gut.
Okay.
Okay, this is a wheat germ. So now, agglutinin is the lectin part of wheat. There's lectins in many vegetables. Agglutinin is in wheat, and agglutinin is the thing that blocks your absorption of vitamin D. And I have had low vitamin D, and my agglutinin's pretty high. It's like double, right?
Yeah, wow.
Double of what it should be.
So now how long does it take for you to be lower in that risk category? How to get it back under control?
6 to 8 months. Everybody's different. It depends on how healthy your immune system is, what else it's combating, right? And, you know, so in the course of 8 months, let's just say somewhere I ate something that maybe had wheat germ in it. Maybe I was at a luncheon somewhere and there was, I don't know, breading on the chicken, or you know what I mean? Like somewhere. But it takes a while, 6 to 8 months typically. Now these panels each are different parts of gluten. So gliadin is one of the protein or peptide chains in gluten, okay? Glutenin is another one. So here you can see I have a lot of issues. Gluten is not okay for me. My Whole Foods test said no problem. I was eating pizza, you know, like, okay, let's order a pizza.
Why not? Yeah.
Yep. And then non-gluten wheat panel. So these are other proteins that are not gluten, but they're still part of wheat. Still a problem for me.
So with something so extreme in terms of sensitivity, would you say for wheat for you, that's not something that once your gut heals that you would want to introduce again? Is that correct?
Correct. Because in this country, wheat is a problem. It's a hybridized plant that our body is like, wait, this isn't the plant for the last 2,000 years I've been eating, number one. And number two, it's so sprayed with glyphosate. I have known people like a woman who actually does the same thing I do. She has Hashimoto's, cut out wheat. She's a nutritional practitioner. And she was going to Italy. And she was like, I'm going to Italy for 10 days. They don't spray their wheat there. It's not the same wheat. I'm having pasta and bread. She went and had no issues. She's like, if I would have had that in 2 days, I would have been in bed with body pain and brain fog. 10 days, I ate it every day. So I would not eat it here. If I went on vacation, I probably would let myself, you know?
Yeah.
And you've got to
Right. Yeah.
see how you respond. I'm going to share with you a little story. So corn, if you remember, corn was a problem for me. I
Hmm.
used to love, in my area, there's something called Quick Check. It's like a not a drive through, but you can get gas and then walk inside like a little mini mart. And I love their,
Okay.
you know, how some people like Starbucks, some people like Dunkin' Donuts. I love Quick Check coffee. And I used to get all the time, this was years ago, with their hazelnut creamer. So
Mhm.
I had cleaned everything up out of my diet. It was really great. I was symptom free, no body pain. And one day it was like a chilly day. I'm like, oh, I just feel like a Quick Check coffee. So I go and get it, hugging my cup. I love it. No problem.
Yeah.
Next day, I'm like, oh, I forgot how much I love that. I'm going to get another one. No problem. About a
Hmm.
week into it, now I'm back into a daily Quick Check coffee with hazelnut creamer. And I wake up and my hip, I can hardly stand on that leg. My hip is killing me. And I have arthritis in my hips due to this chronic inflammation from years and years that I had, which is why I do what I do now. So I'm like, darn it. I didn't even look at the hazelnut creamer. I think part of me kind of didn't want to know. So I go to
Yeah.
Quick Check and I'm like, what's in this thing? Like corn solids was like, it was cane sugar,
Oh no.
corn solids, you know, and
Hmm.
then like safflower oil or whatever it was this creamer. And I'm like, that's what did it. So I stopped after my 7 days in a row. And in like 2 or 3 days, my hip didn't hurt anymore.
Yeah.
So
You're, wow. Our body talks to us. We just have to listen. That's
absolutely.
incredible.
So the next panel
Hmm.
just sort of summarizes what we already looked at. It'll say, okay, we saw high levels of zonulin antibodies. It tells you what that is. So the report just likes to give you a lot of information, and then it'll give you in green some recommendations. These are like standard printed on every report. And then we might use some of that. We might combine that with whatever else is going on with people. So as you go down, so for each part of that panel, it tells you the same thing, right?
Okay.
Gliadin panel,
Yep.
right? So that's how you, glutenin panel. Okay, so let's
Got
just
it.
move through. Now it gives a whole gluten related to nutrition, where you're gonna find gluten, things that don't have gluten in them. The thing to know about gluten though, is it's also in makeup, it's in shampoo, it's in a lot of stuff, which you'll absorb through your
Oh
skin.
wow.
It'll go through your bloodstream and, you know, still cause a problem if it's a problem for you. So somebody with celiac really cannot be around gluten at all.
Yeah.
Somebody, you know, with less sensitivity, you know, maybe isn't worried about it, but I'm just letting you know there are places where gluten shows up, not necessarily part of your food.
So
This is just a glossary.
yeah, didn't know that.
Yeah, I know. People are like, let me tell you another story. I had a client who very gluten sensitive. We couldn't figure out why she was still having symptoms. Her husband was, during lunch when he was at work, he would have, if he had wanted a sandwich or if he wanted pasta, he would do it at lunch away from the house. When he was coming home at night, laying in bed next to him, his body sweat was causing her to react to the gluten he ate at lunch. That's how sensitive
Oh
she was.
my.
Right.
Wow.
Not everybody. You know, I'll make pasta for my son and it's fine, but you know what I mean? It's different for everybody.
That's
Okay.
incredible.
Yeah. Our bodies are really amazing and they really tell us. So these are actually different research references that you can go look up and, you know, where you can find out. So, you know, that's what I love about this lab too, is it just tells you so much information if you
Great.
like to geek out on it. Okay, then corn, we don't need to
Yeah.
go through each one really, but it's just the
Yeah.
same thing. It's going to show you, these are the different parts of corn. My corn was very high, not great. This shows all the different proteins that I
Yeah.
reacted to. Okay. These I didn't react to, but guess what? I
Oh.
can't separate them out. So no corn.
Yeah.
This shows where corn is found. So corn syrup, corn starch, all of that. Okay. Hidden
Yeah.
sources. Look, toothpaste has corn in it. What else?
Wow.
Tea. Plastic food wrap has corn in it.
Oh my gosh. Adhesives and envelopes and stickers. My
Yep.
gosh.
Yep. the receipts of when you go to the grocery store and you get your receipt out of the machine, that has BPA on it, BPA, like plastics that you don't want to drink water out of, on the receipts, which you hold in your hand and then it goes through your skin anyway.
Wow.
Another conversation, but I'm just saying. Okay, so here's, now it's going to get into each of the corn proteins, right? It shows how similar corn is to wheat, which is why it's very common. So these are the whole peptide sequences, and the gray ones are where they're the same. The orange ones are where there's a difference. So they're very much the same, which is, why they're typically both a problem. Okay, we go through each of the proteins. Okay. Then it goes, it has glossaries related to corn so that you understand it. It tells you about IgA, IgE, leaky gut, all that, all the stuff we've already talked about, the resources. And then we get into lectins. So, I mean, I don't think we need to go, unless you want me to, go through the whole test. Now
I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay. The last thing I just want to say about lectins and aquaporins, just because I think it's interesting, but the lectins, and you can see here, like, aquaporins of corn is a problem. Lectin of corn for me is not a problem, right? But all the other proteins were a problem anyway. But again, lectins are the defense mechanism of the plant. So plants are living things, right? They start from a seed, they grow, they die, they're living things, and they can't get up and run away. So the lectin is a defense mechanism that the plant develops to protect it from things eating it. And what lectins are meant to do is damage the digestive system of what eats it, so that animals and insects go, oh yeah, I know that thing's not good for me, and they avoid it because they know. So that's what lectins are, and obviously they're not good for some people as well. Aquaporins, what that is the nervous system of the plant. So human beings have a nervous system throughout the body, and the way that information travels is through an electrical impulse, right?
Yeah.
The way the information travels through the plant, is water. These are water channels. That's information. So that's what they're two different components, but both of them can be a problem. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Well, it really is, because there always is some of that, is food sensitivity a real thing? And it's nice to hear the science behind it, because then we can see, oh yes, it really is. There is something going on here. Here's what your body is physically doing, the physiology of it that truly shows up when you test for it.
Yeah. You keep talking about that. I'm going to let the dog out so she stops barking. Is that all right? Hold on one second.
No problem. Go ahead. So I find this fascinating, because over the years, I've tried different types of elimination diets, and just on my own, I found out, I have a little bit of an allergy to dairy. I mean, I actually have a reaction to it and some other things, but I could tell that my ability to handle wheat was not like it used to. And I've always wondered, I just was so saturated with it growing up. And then as I cleaned up my diet, I became more aware of things causing me to have some ill effects, not feeling great, stomach bloat, just that disease in my stomach, just everything is just off. So I haven't done a food sensitivity test, but I probably should sometime soon. But I did stuff. I took the long route.
You know what? I think that, don't we all? Like, my first autoimmune issue was I was like 21 years old. I'm 55. Like, it was 30 years of the next thing and the next thing. And with autoimmune issues, really any chronic symptom, even if you haven't been diagnosed, with autoimmunity, your body's going, hello, like, I am not okay. The body's just talking to you. It's not bad. It's not, there's not something wrong with you. Like, people see symptoms as, what's wrong with my body? It's your body saying, hello, I need help. Yeah. There's an issue here. And, again, this is a little off topic, but the issue is physical, but there's also oftentimes emotional component to it. Like, hello, I'm not okay. I have stored anger from 20 years ago, and that's now causing
Yeah.
chronic pain in my back, etc. So I just point that out because we go through the journey that we go through and the time that we need to go through it, but it's our body telling us so.
Totally agree. And I really appreciate this discussion because I think it will help people. It will help them say, you know what, I need to take a pause. I need to start looking at these things and see how to change my lifestyle, my diet, to really address some of these symptoms that you described, which are very common symptoms for a lot of people. It's very common.
A lot of people are really operating daily on a level that God did not mean for us to operate.
Yeah.
This is not the life that God pictured for you, or for me. And we just tolerate general feeling of unwell, chronic pain. We just get used to it. And that's not the body. Yeah. It's a magnificent body. It's not how it's supposed to be, I think.
I totally agree.
The other thing I wanted to point out, though, in terms of food sensitivities is, sometimes from a conventional approach, I'll have clients who'll say, my doctor says these tests are, make no sense, or why bother, or it doesn't, or, oh, that test it's only testing what you ate. Well, yeah, that's the point. Is what you're eating causing a problem or not?
Exactly.
Right? Like that's what we're looking to determine. So yes, I get it's only going to show up if you've been eating it, but that's what we want to know. Can you eat this or should you not be eating it so that we can move forward? So I'm always kind of like, okay, and why does that mean it's not worth taking? Like that doesn't make any sense to me. It actually just reinforces why you should get that information so that you can know, am I contributing to this inflammation in my body by the choices I'm making as soon as I wake up every morning?
Absolutely. So we really appreciate that. Any other last minute tips for people?
I don't know. I tried to just think of everything in terms of food sensitivities that I could. Again, just a reminder, it's one place that causes inflammation. It doesn't mean it's the only thing. It is, to my mind, the place to start. Mm-hmm. Because if we can get the immune system sort of calmed down by what you're putting in your mouth daily, now we can go after, toxic loads from environmental toxins or from parasites, which we talked about in the gut health, or from molds or heavy metals or emotional toxicity. Like we need to go after all of those, but this is a place to start, I think. It makes sense to me anyway. Mm-hmm. So, and or things like hormones. People will say, oh, my hormones are wacky. So they want to address their hormones. But to me, if you picture a ladder, and you're going to step on the first rung and then the second rung and the third rung, hormones are like the 10th rung. Like you're not going to take something to support hormones. You may want to help your adrenals a little bit, but you've got to start at the first rung. We're not going to start here and step up. You got to start at the bottom. So that's all.
Totally agree. That's wonderful. So why don't you remind us how we can get a hold of you, and so if people can reach out to you?
Sure, thanks. So I make it pretty consistent so you don't have to remember a lot. It's Organic Health Journey, because that was me. I spent 30 years on a journey, which had me go back to school and now do what I do. But it's organichealthjourney.com is my website, which is under construction right now. So I think you can still pull it up, but I know that it's being worked on. But anyway, Organic Health Journey, organichealthjourney@gmail.com is my email. On Facebook, Organic Health Journey is the business page. And on LinkedIn, guess what it is? Organic Health Journey. Yeah.
Awesome. So, wonderful. That's nice consistency there. I'm glad you grabbed all those names.
Or lack of creativity. I'm not sure which, but there you go.
Consistency, branding, you're branding. That's what you're doing.
There you go.
That's awesome. Well, we really appreciate having you on today. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for sharing. People, please reach out to Linda. She has a ton of knowledge. You can see just by her description, she knows this stuff inside and out. So thank you again, Linda.
Thank you, Dr. Amy, for having me on. I love spending Saturday afternoons with you every so often.
Wonderful. So thank you all for joining us today for the Weekend Wellness Hour show. We will see you again next weekend. Have a great week and take care. Bye, guys.